Hey guys, it's James here from AlgoHoldem, and I'm going to walk through an overview of the software and how to get the best out of it to help improve your poker game. Let's talk first about the idea behind it and why it's different from other software out there. Currently, there is a variety of software out there that allows for you to input a range and do some equity analysis based on those inputs. Although powerful, there is a problem with this, and it's that incorrect range assessments will provide incorrect results. And as it turns out, range assessment isn't an easy task, and it's a vital part of a player's poker game. So it's important you can learn to do this on your own accurately. And this is what AlgoHoldem is for. AlgoHoldem uses training data specific to clients and stakes to learn how to model players and output accurate range assessments. It then helps you visualize it in a way that's detailed yet simple to follow to help you learn how to make these assessments accurately on your own. And on top of learning correct range assessments, there are also other things that you can look at to help verify that you made the correct call, value bet, bluff, and also learn how you stand up against other opponents at certain spots during the hand. With that being said, let's look through a demo hand and see what AlgoHoldem has to offer. And after that, go through some specific examples that show you how to use the tool in a way to help you learn from your mistakes or verify your correct decisions. First, we need to upload hands we are interested in looking at. To do that, click on the menu button and select Upload Hands. From our poker client where we downloaded our hand histories, we can copy and paste the text into the form here. To save time, I already have the hands I want to analyze copied. When done correctly, we should see it populate the sidebar with our hands, like so. There are also some options we can select. First, let's go over selecting a model. Each option is a separate model trained to a specific player base. You can choose the one that most accurately describes your situation. Currently, there are just models to support different stakes, so you would choose the model that is within the range of the stakes you played your hands with. If you don't want to go through this hassle, no worries. The auto option will automatically detect which option to use. I'm going to use mid, as the hand we're going to analyze is a $50 no limit hand. The second set of options includes some specific settings when loading a hand. There are currently two: the types of preflops buckets to use and the number of equity simulations. Preflop buckets will just change the types of categories you see under the bucket section, which we will go into later, and the equity option specifies how many simulations you want to run for the equity analysis part of the modeler. Medium will provide faster loading times with accurate estimations, but if you want a little more precision, you can choose high. I'm going to keep them on medium and categorical for this example. On top of these options, you can also sort by certain attributes. For example, by clicking on the column, we can sort by the amount won or lost. Let's search for the hand we want to analyze by typing its unique ID in the search bar and then selecting Load like so. And there we have it. The next step is to wait for the processing to finish and for the hand to upload. Here's a look of what you'll be greeted with when the hand finishes loading. Although seemingly a lot at first, most of the modeler just includes different ways of viewing a player's hand range, with some options to look at holdings in more detail. The bar on the top indicates which player's range you are viewing. In this case, we are viewing the range of player 1. The hand replayer allows you to move back and forth throughout the hand. The far left and right buttons will move forward and backwards to the spectating player's next or last move, in this case player 1. We can see that as I move between the far right and left button. The next button inward will control the hand a street forward and backward. As you can see, by pressing the right, it moves the street from preflop and flop, and vice versa. The next inner set of buttons will move forward and backward a move, and the middle two buttons will stop to start the hand, and the other one will restart it. Let's focus more on the output now. We can break the output into 4 sections: the range table modeler on the top right, the bucket modeler on the bottom left, the equity modeler below the replayer, and the individual holding modeler on the bottom right. Let's take a look at the range table modeler. I will assume you have some knowledge of what this is, as this is the most common way of representing ranges, especially if you have used other software in the past. The more green a cell in the table is, the more likely an opponent has that holding. You can view the exact value by looking at its corresponding list value on the right or hovering it with your mouse. For example, in the beginning of this hand, player 1 has a 0.2% chance of holding ace-ace. We can see this both by hovering like so, and also finding the holding in the list. There are also other viewing options. Looking below the table, we see options for percent hold difference, rank, and rank difference. Percent difference shows the percent change from the last update. We will go over when a player's range updates in a little bit. As we can see in this specific example, any holdings with an ace or a king is colored red because the starting combinations of the hero's hand has been taken out of their range. We can verify how much this decreased by hovering it over like so. or finding the hand in the list. There are also rank/rank difference options. These show the rank of the holding, with 1 being the highest held hand percentage and 169 being the lowest. Let's take a look at some extra ways to sort through the data by looking at the list. If we're interested in looking at hands that change the most between a range update, we can sort the column by percent difference. We can then see that if we sort by ascending order, that all the hands with an ace or a king have decreased a fair bit, while the rest were evenly distributed across other holdings. The last column is the FCR column. This is an important one and allows for a lot of cool exploration and analysis. It displays the percentage of the time an opponent will make a certain move given they have that specific holding. For example, in this case, player 1 will be raising pocket aces almost 100% of the time, but if we move to a weaker hand like ace-10 offsuit, we can see that player 1 will be folding around 1/3 of the time. We can view the exact probabilities by selecting the raw move percentage checkbox up on the top right like so. Also to note, the FCR section will update right before a player is about to make a move and will reset on each street. After a player makes a move, this is when their range will update. A player's range will also update at the start of each street, as combinations of community cards will be taken out of all players' ranges. You can also sort by FCR tendencies by selecting the move you want to sort by and choosing ascending or descending. In this case, I am sorting by descending raise percentage. We can go through a fun example to see how well the AI learned how much a position has an effect on a player's opening range. Let's choose the hand ace-10 offsuit, as that's a hand opening that is affected a bit by position. Under the gun, we can see a higher fold percentage and see it continually get lower as we move through the other players. As we can see, as we move through each player that folded, ace-10 offsuit continually increases in range percentage. We can also see the total FCR on the top, which summarize all the holdings together, which will also gradually shift to more green as we move down in position. By looking more closely, we can see what factors will affect the opening ranges of players at the stakes you play at, and how it varies from how they should be playing by referencing experts/GTO analysis. The next section to look at is the bucket modeler, which groups a lot of similar holdings based on board texture to get a higher overview summary of the range table. For example, on an ace-high flop, a hand like ace-king and ace-queen would be grouped into the same category, and would get displayed as a top pair top kicker bucket in the bucket modeler. The bucket modeler fields are similar to those of the range cells. The only difference is the way it groups card combinations. You can do the same type of analysis here. One thing to note is the bar chart on the bottom left corner. You are allowed to select which bars you want to see by checking the corresponding bucket name in the list. This is useful when a single bucket takes up a majority of the holding percentage and it makes it hard to analyze other buckets. For example, the pre-flop bucket for weak hands is in the 70s, which can make the other buckets hard to visualize. By unchecking it, we can see the percent distributions of other buckets more clearly. By selecting a bucket row, we can see two things happening. One is that each holding in the bucket is highlighted in the range table, and on top of that, the individual holding modeler on the bottom right populates with information. This is also another way to verify which hands belong to a specific bucket. And as a segue into the individual holding modeler, we can also populate its information by clicking on a range cell too. So why the need for the individual holding modeler? As it turns out, a hand like ace-jack suited will contain hands with different strengths when there is a flush draw on the board. As an example, if we go to the turn, we can see that there are 2 diamonds on the board. By selecting ace-jack suited in the range table and looking at the individual holding list for our hero in a position where he needs to make a call, we can see that the FCR tendencies are different versus all other combinations. The individual holding modeler is just a way to go into more detail about the holdings when needed. For buckets, it's a little bit different. Instead of the exact card combinations, the holdings in the individual modeler are condensed representations of the range table. It's a little much for a starter guide, so if you're confused about its notation, I recommend you read section 7.4 of the full guide. But here's a quick example of me scrolling through the mid-pair bucket for player 5 on the turn. The default section is the makeup one, but there's also an option to look at specific holdings across each range update by selecting the across time view like so. This shows the change of percent hold throughout the hand for a particular player and holding. Let's analyze pocket aces over time for player 6. We can see that pocket aces reaches its peak when the player bets the flop in the turn, but then decreases drastically when an ace appears on the river and then the player checks. And the last one is the equity modeler. The equity modeler is the most straightforward and will display the win percentages for each player throughout each point in the hand. Keep in mind that for the hero, which is denoted by an asterisk, the equity percentage is based off their specific holding, and for other players, it's based off their range. You can use this section to verify that you're either ahead or behind in a certain part of the hand. For example, on the turn, we are dominating player 6 range and have a 74% chance of winning the hand if it goes to showdown at that point. Also, if you're faced with a situation to call, the EV section will also display some useful information. We will go over this more in detail when we look at specific examples of how to use AlgoHoldem's range modeler to study efficiently. As a quick example, on the turn, we have a very high percent chance of winning, which means we should also have a high EV when we call, like so. Let's get into some real examples now. Because the tool is open-ended, it might be a little unclear on how to use this tool to study. I will hopefully clarify some ways where you can get some use out of this as a powerful poker study tool. I will go over 3 specific examples that include different types of analysis you can look at while using AlgoHoldem to help point out your own mistakes or verify that you made a correct decision. We will use AlgoHoldem to get help for the following 3 situations: deciding whether to make a tough call, deciding whether it's a good spot to make a bluff, and figuring out how to size your value bets. Let's look at the first scenario. This one puts the hero in a tough situation by the river. The action goes 3 ways to the flop, with the small blind raising and the hero 3-betting in the big blind. The main villain calls in position, and we see a 3-way flop. It checks to the villain, who makes a half-pot bet where the other player folds and the hero calls with mid-player. The turn then checks through, and then the villain puts out a pot bet when an ace shows up on the river. As the hero, the fact that all draws miss the river makes it pretty tempting to call, but it's also possible the villain was c-betting the flop with ace high and is now trying to capitalize with his made hand on the river. Let's see what AlgoHoldem's modeler thinks. AlgoHoldem gives its analysis here by polarizing the opponent's range with his river bet. The range modeler believes that an ace-x top pair hand wouldn't bet with enough frequency and with the sizing of the pot enough for the hero to be repping an incredible hand. We see that 2-pair hands move up a lot, but a lot of possible no-pair hands like queen-king off and heavy draws like queen-nine of spades stay stagnant, as missed hands with no sign of aggression from an opponent is a great spot to make a bluff. By looking at the EV analysis section, it's a tough call, but with an assessed equity of 36%, the AI recommends calling a $17 bet looking to earn $1 in expected value in the long run. It looks like our hero isn't as good and decides to make the laydown, where the villain ends up having king-10 off. Like this hand, AlgoHoldem could help verify all the tough situations an opponent will put you through by learning to exploit their tendencies. It's also important to note that you can go deeper and explore the villain's range throughout the hand and learn how that flop c-bet and turn check affected his range to lead to this outcome in the river. So you can apply the output here to real time at the poker table later. Now let's take a look at the second scenario. In this situation, we will be evaluating a bluff the hero made on the river and determining whether it was a long-term profitable decision. The hand starts out with the button limping in and the hero raising them in the big blind. We see a c-bet on the flop and then a double barrel on the turn that doesn't go through. With AlgoHoldem, we can determine whether a triple barrel can be a good option here. First, let's see how it actually went down. The hero bets $10 when an overcard shows up, and we get the outcome we wanted, the opponent folding. To verify this was a correct move, we can use pot odds in combination with the total FCR of our opponent to verify if the hero has the fold percentage needed to make the right play. With a half-pot bet, the villain needs to fold at least 33% of the time for it to be a profitable play. If you are confused on how to get this value, you need to divide your total bet by the total pot after you put the money in. Here's a quick chart to reference the needed fold percentages and bet sizes to make a profitable bluff here. After looking at our opponent's move tendencies, we see that based off his range, he will fold 51% of the time. This means that even if we have 0 equity, this will be a profitable play. We can see some of the specific holdings our villain holds before the river call. Most of his top hands are missed straight draws and ace high. It's clear why it's a good idea to appear strong and go for it on the river. The opponent ended up having exactly what AlgoHoldem put them on, a weak gutter, and we can even see that the exact holding, 10 suited, ranks high up in AlgoHoldem's range assessment. In the last hand we'll take a look at, we will evaluate the hero's bet sizing to see if they got the maximum value from the set they hit on the flop. It starts with the hero opening an under the gun +1 with pocket threes and the villain flatting behind. Everyone else folds through where we go 2 ways to a flop, and the hero hits their bottom set on an ace-high board. The hero bets all 3 streets, but for simplicity, let's evaluate the sizing on the river. The hero bets about $14 into 29, but if we take a look at the opponent's range here, there's a lot of support for sizing bigger. If we can combine the top pair buckets, we see that any ace-x hand totals close to 50% of the opponent's range. And by looking at their FCR tendencies of both the range list and bucket list, we see that these holdings are folding less than 50% of the time for bottom kickers and 35% for top and mid kickers. We can also see that the next highest bucket is a mid-pair hand, which is folding to a half-pot bet on the river about 70% of the time. Seeing this, it looks like AlgoHoldem is recommending to size higher and target top pair hands, which don't have much fold percentage, as a mid-pair kicker is folding a lot regardless of bet size. It's also important to note that in the future, our EV solver will allow users to evaluate EVs for multiple bet sizes for each move in the hand, and can verify this assumption directly. But as of now, there's still a lot of analysis to be done when trying to aim for max value. And that's about all. Hopefully that gave a big enough introduction to get a lot of study use out of AlgoHoldem's range modeler. If you haven't already, you can follow our Discord and join a community of other people using the same software to help better their game. Link will be in the description below.